Welcome, everyone. We will start in a few minutes as people are still signing in. Thank you.
Checking my microphone. This is Brennan.
I got you, Brennan. This is Katie.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Hello, everyone. We're going to get started here in a second. All right. Hi, hello. I am Laura Corona with the Colorado Water Conservation Board, also known as the CWCB for short. And I will be serving today as your MC in addition to your first presenter. You have joined us today for our annual Instream Flow workshop. Welcome. The Instream Flow, or ISF program, is now 50 years old, and here is a shameless plug for our 50th anniversary video, which you can check out on our website at cwcb.colorado.gov. Here's a fun fact from the Colorado Wildlife Council. Hunting and fishing are essential parts of Colorado's economy, bringing in over $3 billion annually and supporting more than 25,000 full-time jobs across the state. Anglers in particular bring in a large portion of that money. It is just one of the many reasons that rivers and lakes are so important to our state. Our agenda today will start with a general overview of the Instream Flow program and go into the process of new appropriations. Then our recommenders will share their new recommendations they are bringing to us this year. After which, we will transition to another approach of the Instream Flow program, acquisitions. We will go through an overview of what an in-stream flow acquisition is and the request for water process. At the end, we will have time devoted to answering questions, but in the meantime, please feel free to put your questions in the chat and we will look for time to answer them while we are transitioning between presenters or hold them to the end. The raise hand feature is also available. Please hold off on these until between speakers unless there's an urgent question. Thank you. Our in-stream flow team at the CWCB is led by our section chief, Rob Veal. Our legal protection is run by Kaylee White, Colin Watson, and Kim Ricotta. On acquisitions, we have Pete Konovitz and Kaylee White. On new appropriations, we have Brandy Logan, Marielle Siddell, and myself, as well as Shade Cromanti Clemens, who is helping us out through the month of May. In-stream flows, or ISFs, and natural lake levels, or NLLs, are specific water rights held for the citizens of Colorado by the CWCB. They have a few features that are familiar to Colorado's prior appropriation system. They're defined by the amount of water and by a time frame. They're administered within the prior appropriation system by their appropriation date, and they have a recognized beneficial use. What makes them unique is that they are non-consumptive and for minimum flows. They keep water within a stream reach or a natural lake, and their beneficial use is to preserve the natural environment. The CWCB holds water rights for over 1,700 ISFs and NLLs. These are mostly located near headwater catchments on the western slope of the state. I will be focusing now on the new appropriations process and everything that goes into an appropriation of an in-stream flow water right. The whole process can be broken down into 7 steps. The first step, a recommending entity usually starts with goals motivating their desire to conserve a reach of stream or natural lake. Second, the recommending entity will take time to gather data and formulate the details of their recommendation for a new appropriation. Third, the recommending entity will present their recommendation for a new appropriation publicly to us here at the annual ISF workshop. You will be hearing from them a little later. Fourth, the CWCB staff will perform a water availability assessment on the recommended body of water. Fifth, the CWCB will reach out to and work with stakeholders that may be impacted by an appropriation of that body of water. Sixth, the CWCB staff will go through our board's process for presenting the data and going through the approval process by our board. Seventh, the CWCB will file an application with the state's water court and go through their process. The recommending entity can be anyone, but most often we work with government agencies like the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, and Colorado Parks and Wildlife, or with conservation groups like High Country Conservation Advocates. Whoever the entity may be, they typically start with some conservation goal related to stream flow or bathymetry of a natural lake. Some recent examples include our native cutthroat trouts, some native species known as the 3 species, which are the bluehead sucker, flannel sucker, and round-tailed chub. Riparian habitat, which has been identified by the Colorado Natural Heritage Program as rare habitat, and boreal toads. Once a need has been identified, the entity needs to formulate their in-stream flow recommendation that they'll be making to the CWCB. This includes several things, but there are two main parts. First is the identification of a natural environment that they want to preserve. This is most often the presence of a fish species, but could be any water-dependent species or value, such as macroinvertebrates, unique geological features, or riparian plant communities. Second, the entity will need to quantify the minimum flow needed to preserve the identified natural environment. This is site-specific depending on the stream, usually based on R2 cross modeling, which determines the stream flow that will maintain 3 hydraulic parameters related to the habitat. The 3 parameters are average depth, average velocity, and channel wetted perimeter, such as shown in the diagram on the right for each stream channel. These values vary with the size and shape of that stream channel. Once the entity has their recommendation formulated, they will present their recommendation publicly to the CWCB at one of our annual ISF workshops, such as the one you're at today. Generally, we hold these workshops once a year between January and March. Once the CWCB has received the recommendation, staff will perform our independent analysis to determine if there is water available in the streams for an ISF appropriation. We call this our water availability analysis. It is a data-driven approach in which we are looking for the best information we can find. We identify any available data, including stream gauge analysis, statistic models, diversion records, or by installing our own stream gauges. In addition, we talk to folks on the ground such as Division of Water Resources staff or other local partners who know the stream systems the best. This hydrologic data helps us determine the available amount and timing of flows, like when runoff occurs or summer flows start to recede to base flows. This graphic illustrates how this process shapes the ISF. The red dotted line shows the original recommendation. We add on hydrologic data of water that is actually in the stream, shown in black, also known as the hydrograph. And then we shape the recommendation to fit the water that is available, as shown in blue. At the same time that we are doing water availability analysis, we are also performing outreach. This includes notices sent out through our ISF mailing list, meeting with county commissioners, sending out letters to landowners adjacent to the stream or lake, and posting notices in the local newspapers. Once we have completed our outreach efforts and our water availability analysis, shown on the diagram here in turquoise in the middle, we then present the final recommendation to our board, which starts our board process, which is diagrammed here on the right in green. Most often, we bring the recommendations to our board during their regular January meeting, where if approved, they will form their intent to appropriate. There will be a public comment period held at our March meeting, and then final action will be taken on any uncontested appropriations in May. If there are any contested appropriations, hearings will be held in September and final action will be taken then. Once the board has taken final action to approve an appropriation, staff will submit an application for the in-stream flow water right to Water Court before the end of the calendar year. To review the process, First, a recommender has a conservation goal on a stream, reach, or natural lake. Second, they formulate a recommendation to the CWCB, including the natural environment they aim to preserve and the minimum amount of water they have determined necessary to preserve that environment. Third, the recommender will publicly present the recommendations to the CWCB at our annual ISF workshop. Fourth, the CWCB staff will perform our water availability analysis driven by hydrologic data of water available in the stream to appropriate. Fifth, at the same time, the CWCB will go through its outreach process to inform and work with stakeholders. Sixth, staff will proceed with the CWCB board process for new appropriations. And finally, seventh, the board will approve. With board approval, staff will move forward by submitting an application to Water Court within that calendar year and follow the Water Court processes. We don't always bring every recommendation presented to us at the workshop to the board the following year. Some of our streams require more time to gather data and/or work with stakeholders. Here are recommendations that have been presented at previous ISF workshops, and we are continuing to work on. There are currently a lot of them and are challenging to fit onto a slide in a visually appealing way. I apologize that they are likely hard to see here. You can, however, find this list along with more information about each one at our website at cwcb.colorado.gov/2024-ISF-recommendations. Today's recommendations are brought to you by Colorado Parks and Wildlife, the Bureau of Land Management, High Country Conservation Advocates, and the National Park Service. I am now going to take any questions for me before handing it off to Katie Birch with Colorado Parks and Wildlife.
All right. Sounds like there aren't any questions for you, Laura.
Yeah, take it away, Katie.
Cool. Can you see my slides?
Yes, I can, Katie. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Hi, folks. I'm Katie Birch. I'm the Instream Flow Program Coordinator for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and I'll talk about our upcoming Instream Flow efforts for 2024. First, I thought it would be a good opportunity to touch on why CPW participates in the Instream Flow and Natural Lake Level program. Collaborating with CWCB helps CPW fulfill our statutory charge that wildlife and their environment are to be protected, preserved, enhanced, and managed for the use, benefit, and enjoyment of people of the state and its visitors. Additionally, we have many strategic planning documents that direct our staff to conserve wildlife and their habitats to ensure healthy, sustainable populations and ecosystems. And specifically, the Instream Flow program is called out, and CPW is directed to protect and enhance water resources for fish and wildlife populations by pursuing partnerships and agreements that enhance in-stream flows, protect reservoir levels, and influence water management activities. So with all that, CPW annually forms recommendations to bring to the CWCB for in-stream flow and natural lake level water rights. So I will touch on where we're working. These are all ongoing efforts. None of these are new streams. When I started in this position, we set out with a pretty ambitious list of fisheries supporting native species that didn't have in-stream flows. And so we're working to take away at that list and get in-stream flows on all of those. So the focus for us is on fisheries with high conservation value. So those are fish species and amphibian species that are listed in our state wildlife action plan as a tier 1 or tier 2 species of greatest conservation need. Some of these are federally threatened, others are just state threatened or just generally on the decline. And so that list comes from leveraging knowledge from our local area aquatic biologists about where they think the needs are greatest. And in addition to that list, we continue to partner with any interested agency, local governments, federal agencies, stream management plan groups, or watershed groups. So we're kind of throughout the state is where we're working. We're in the South Platte Basin and Arkansas Basin this coming year, as well as the Gunnison Basin. And that may change in future years. But I'll start with the South Platte River Basin, where we're focused on greenback cutthroat trout recovery. The greenback cutthroat is Colorado state fish, and they're a federally threatened species. At one point, they were very, very close to being extinct. And so CPW is working to establish stable, self-sustaining populations of greenback. I think last I checked, we have around 7 populations, and we're working to secure in-stream flow protections where it makes sense for those species. And so on this map, you can see 3 tributaries of the Poudre River. We have Williams Gulch, Roaring Creek, and East Fork Roaring Creek, which have all been reestablished for greenback populations. In 2024, we recommended Williams Gulch to the CWCB for an in-stream flow right. They formed their intent to appropriate on that a couple of weeks ago. Roaring Creek has an existing in-stream flow right, but East Fork Roaring Creek does not. And so we'll be moving East Fork Roaring Creek forward in the next couple of years. This area was hit pretty hard by the Cameron Peak fire, and so we're waiting for some of those conditions to stabilize before we can go out and effectively collect R2 cross data. But East Fork Roaring Creek is on the list for greenback recovery and flow protection. Moving down to the Arkansas Basin, we are working on Cottonwood Creek, which is a tributary of Alvarado Creek, which is kind of a Sangre de Cristo stream that flows to the eastern side. This creek supports Hayden Creek cutthroat trout. CPW has been working to stock these species in this creek for the past 3 years. This is the closest thing the Arkansas Basin has to a native cutthroat trout with some unique genetic markers. So in 2024, we'll probably move forward with R2 cross data collection now that those species have been stocked 3 years in a row, and hopefully move that one to the CWCB this coming year. In the Gunnison River Basin, we're collaborating with Park Service and BLM on Pine Creek. You've seen this one before. It's an ongoing effort. We've collected preliminary flow recommendations and have that data sets, but we're really working on engagement right now with local constituents, which includes private landowners and the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. In the spring, we're going to do a site visit with all those affected parties to talk about an in-stream flow and understand everyone's goals and decide if an in-stream flow makes sense on Pine Creek. If we do move it forward, we'll probably look at those flow rates in the bottom left. And the reason we're interested in the stream is because it supports a pretty healthy population of trout, which you can see in this photo, a trout from Pine Creek. In the Gunnison Basin, we're also working on native species conservation for the Gunnison Basin lineage of the Colorado River cutthroat trout. We have 6 streams here that support core conservation populations of Colorado River cutthroat trout, which means that they have very, very pure genetics, meaning they haven't been intergressed or invaded by non-native trout. So the first 3 are on the Uncompahgre Plateau just west of Montrose. That's East Fork Dry Creek, unnamed trib to East Fork Dry Creek, and Beaver Dams Creek. And then in the North Fork Gunnison Basin, we have Main, Middle, and West Hubbard Creeks, which are tributaries that have a fish barrier on them, this overland canal, which you can see in the picture, and that's really helped to shore up those populations and prevent them from hybridization. So we want to see in-stream flows on all 3 of these tribs to support the native cutthroat. And we have R2 cross collected on those Uncompahgre Plateau tribs. You can see those flow rates here. I'm not going to go into the details, but pretty modest flow rates for these headwaters first order streams. And then on West Hubbard Creek, which is shown here, it's a bit of a bigger tributary. We're looking at about 0.4 CFS and about 6 CFS during the high flow period. And we need to continue to collect data on Main and Middle Hubbard Creeks in 2024. So that'll be a goal of CPW's in the coming year. And I know we're not taking questions just yet, but I wanted to pass along my contact info, and that will conclude my presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Katie. All right. Up next, we will have Roy Smith with the Bureau of Land Management.
Hi, Laura, can you hear me?
Hi, Roy. Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. For those I haven't met in the audience, my name's Roy Smith. I'm the statewide lead for the Bureau of Land Management for water rights, in-stream flow protection, and our Wild and Scenic Rivers program. I've worked for BLM Colorado for 32 years, so I'm pretty familiar with most corners of the state. And to start off, I wanted to talk a little bit about why BLM coordinates with the program, just like Katie just talked about. Part of it is that BLM lands are intermixed with other landowners. Unlike the Forest Service, where a lot of the acreage managed is at the top of watersheds with a limited amount of private property intermixed, BLM has a lot of private lands intermixed with our land ownership. And so for us to have effective in-stream flow protection, we can't have water rights that just apply to BLM managed lands. We need to have water rights that apply to the stream and to all of our neighbors. And so we've had a robust cooperative effort over the last 25 years with the CWCB, where we've made more than 250 in-stream flow recommendations on separate segments and had those appropriated by the board. So we're a big cooperator and supporter of the program. The other thing that the program helps BLM do is we get many requests for land use authorization for water facilities on public lands. And when we get those, we have to evaluate the impact of the proposed facilities on the environment. And if there's an in-stream flow water right in place, and we can have that assurance that there's going to be water in the stream to protect the natural environment, in most cases, we can avoid imposing terms and conditions on the proposed facility or reauthorization of the facility to keep water in the stream for supporting the natural environment. So the program helps BLM achieve many of its objectives for fish, riparian, and for just real estate management as well. So this year, I'm going to share my screen here. I got to find it. I'm not used to using this software. There we go. Laura, can you see that?
No, I cannot.
Ooh.
Did you click
Hold
the
on.
share screen?
Hold on. Okay. Oh, I see what's going on. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, now I have to do. Okay, can you still see that, Laura?
Now it is showing your notes page.
Huh. That's interesting. Okay. I'm going to try this a different way.
Sure thing.
Let's see. Oh, okay. Let's try this. Can you see that?
Yes, that looks perfect, Roy.
Okay, sorry. I am just not used to this software. So this year, this presentation is relatively short for BLM. Normally, we have anywhere between 10 and 20 streams that we recommend each year. But the reason for the shorter list this year, only 5 streams, is that BLM's decided that for the next couple of years, we really want to focus on some of those streams on the list that Laura put up, which have not gone through to the board yet to make an appropriation. And some of those streams require more data collection in terms of R2 cross or modeling, and other streams require more data collection in terms of water availability. But those BLM recommended streams on Laura's list are super high priority for us. So we really want to focus on those the next 2 years. But we do have this small handful that you could see brought before the board in the next couple of years. This is just a picture of one of the streams I'm going to be talking about. It's Burroughs Creek in the headwaters of the Animas River watershed. Oh, let's see here. There we go. Okay. And I'm going to first start talking about streams in Water Division 6. This is not one of them. This is the Yampa River that flows through BLM Managed Lands in Water Division 6, but I'm just using this as an introductory slide. One of the streams that is a super high priority for BLM is Milk Creek in Water Division 6. This was brought forward in a workshop a little more than 5 or 6 years ago, and it's taken quite a while to decide on a methodology for quantifying this creek and for gathering water availability information. But BLM, CWCB, and Colorado Parks and Wildlife are fully engaged in a project now to get that quantification and water availability work done. So I just wanted to bring this back up again because it's a fairly significant and big project. In terms of Milk Creek location, Laura, can you see my cursor moving around on this screen?
Yes.
Okay, I will use my cursor then. So Milk Creek is a tributary to the Yampa River. So this is an aerial image. This is Craig. And then here's the Yampa River flowing through the Craig vicinity, and then through the Juniper Mountain area, and then off to the west toward its confluence with the Green in Dinosaur National Park. Milk Creek is a tributary that comes in from the south. It drains a very large watershed to the south. However, we're just suggesting an in-stream flow water right on the very lowest piece of that stream system. And that's basically from the confluence with Stinking Gulch, which I'll discuss next, which comes in here from the east, down to the confluence with the Yampa River. And I'll talk about why we're focused on that lower piece of the creek in just a moment. So on Milk Creek, we have a natural environment of high interest to BLM and Colorado Parks and Wildlife. We have flannelmouth sucker, bluehead sucker, round-tailed chub, and speckled dace, all native species. And the first 3 species that I just spoke of are the subject of a multi-state, multi-agency conservation agreement where we are working to attempt to prevent those species from being listed under the Endangered Species Act. And Milk Creek is super important habitat for them. In fact, CPW is involved in a stocking effort to place bluehead suckers in Milk Creek to benefit the overall population that inhabits the Yampa River. And so this lower portion of Milk Creek is super important spawning habitat, and it's really good habitat for the fish because of the water quality, which makes it not super amenable to use by non-natives. But as you can see here, these non-natives that are on the list do make their way onto the creek. And we have a riparian community comprised of willows and sedges and rushes with remnant cottonwood communities, and they're on an upward trend as we try to improve the grazing regime along the creek. We're right now in a team with CWCB and Colorado Parks and Wildlife. We're doing some modeling on this stream using the System for Environmental Analysis. It's called CEFA. That might be a new acronym for you. Previously, this type of work was done with software called PHAB-SIM, or Physical Habitat Simulation. but that software has now been superseded by this more modern software package. So we are using it and have collected data last field season, and now we're running that data through the model, and that'll help us suggest some flow rates for protection. This is a snowmelt driven hydrograph. It has low but reliable base flows, and it's the bottom of a very large watershed. And we do have some historic gauge data available, and CWCB has installed a temporary gauge to collect yet more information. There are no water rights within the reach, but there are a very large number of upstream water rights because of the large size of the watershed. And the stakeholders are the multiple water right owners upstream in the watershed. We do have some private landowners along the reach and water right owners immediately upstream. And so one of the more important stakeholders is Colawile Coal Company, which is held by Tri-State. And we've been talking with them about this particular recommendation, and we've been talking about Tri-State's exercise, current and future, of its water rights in this watershed. Other interested parties include Moffat County, and I've talked already quite a bit about Colorado Parks and Wildlife. The next stream I want to talk about is a tributary to Milk Creek. It's called Stinking Gulch. Not a super attractive name, but despite the name, we have some native species that really like this creek. And so you might recall that earlier I showed you the Milk Creek location, and the lower terminus here. So this is the Yampa River again, coming through Craig. This is Milk Creek coming down toward the Yampa River, and Stinking Gulch is this tributary to the east that goes out and around like this. And so our suggested appropriation is up to the headwaters of that creek. And in this creek, we have flannelmouth sucker and speckled dace. We have some non-natives that make their way in: creek chub, red-sided shiner, and white sucker. We have northern leopard frogs that are supported by this creek, which are a BLM sensitive species. We have a riparian community of sedges, rushes, and grasses. And what's super important is that Stinking Gulch is a key contributor to base flow in Milk Creek. Without this contribution from Milk Creek, flows in Milk Creek would get really, really low and not provide the optimal habitat that we're looking for the native fishes that use the creek, that use Milk Creek. Our preliminary flow rates are displayed here on the screen. They're not really high flow rates because this is not a really large creek. And this may be subject to additional data collection, modeling, and water availability analysis during 2024. Like Milk Creek, it's a headwaters stream with a snowmelt driven hydrograph. There's no gauge data available on Stinking Gulch just because there's not a lot of water rights exercised on it. And so it's a little bit more challenging to figure out the flow regime here. And we have one water right within the reach called the McCleary Ditch. It's a small absolute water right with 2.8 CFS remaining conditional. And the stakeholders are similar to those on Milk Creek. And as you can see, this creek, when it floods and goes out of its channel, provides lots of nice habitat outside of the main channel that is used by species like the northern leopard frog. Now I want to go to a different part of Water Division 6 and talk about Willow Creek and West Branch Willow Creek. And there's a lot of Willow Creeks in Colorado, so I'm going to show you a map of exactly where I'm talking about. So on this map, we are right up against the Wyoming border. This line right here is the Wyoming border. And we are in the headwaters of the Little Snake River. This irrigation that you see here is the Little Snake River. And we're near a lodge that you might know about. It's called the Three Forks Lodge. It's a high-end hunting, fishing, and kind of a dude ranch kind of lodge. And they own a lot of the land in and around the BLM land here, where this data was collected. So we're looking at a tributary to the Little Snake River, and the main stem of Willow Creek is this little piece here, and then we have the West Branch over here. small streams, but reliable flow, and they provide some nice habitat. In this creek, we have some native species, speckled dace, mountain sucker, and then we do have a few non-natives that have made their way into the creek chub, and fathead minnow. We have a riparian community of willow, alder, sedges, and rushes, and we have like a macro invertebrate or stream insect community that you would expect to find on a creek like this, which is composed of mayflies and caddisflies. The proposed flow rates are displayed on the screen. These are not large streams, right around 1 cubic feet per second or below, with higher rates during the growing season and lower rates during the colder part of the year. Water availability, these are also headwater streams with snowmelt driven hydrographs. No gauge data is available. We have a couple of ditches on the creek itself, on Willow Creek, the Pine Scope Ditch 1 and 2, and the Lake Fork Ditch 4 CFS is located upstream from our proposed reach on Willow Creek. The stakeholders here, one of the big ones is Three Forks Ranch. Three Forks Ranch gave BLM personnel permission to go in and collect this data. We've let them know that we are thinking about proceeding with an in-stream flow appropriation. The ranch requested that we give them a little bit of time to file for any change of water rights that are needed on the ranch before we start the in-stream flow process. So we've waited a couple years to allow that to happen, and now we'll be checking back in again with the ranch and making sure that they're in a position and they're okay with us proceeding with this recommendation. And then there are some other private landowners along the creek in the watershed, and the creek is located in Routt County, so Routt County will have an interest as well. And now I'm going to switch to Water Division 7. This is the Animas River in Water Division 7 on a particularly cold fall day where we were collecting data. This is not the subject of any BLM recommendations, but I put this slide up here because we do have a recommendation in the headwaters of this river system. Burrows Creek is, like I mentioned before with the earlier slide, this is in the headwaters of the Animas Creek watershed. You can tell by this photo that we are way above tree line, up at around 11,000 feet. And these stakeholders that we're speaking with, we are standing on some of the tailings of an old mine in the area called the Boston Mine. And so this is within a historic mine district. In the larger context, there's a whole mining district in the headwaters of the Animas called the Bonita Peak Mining District, where there's lots of abandoned mines and some fairly extensive issues with abandoned mine land drainage. So the reach that we are interested in, this is off to the north of the map here would be Uray, and then this is Highway 550 going over Red Mountain Pass, and then Silverton would be down and to the left off this map. We're in the headwaters of the Animas. This is a little community called Animas Forks, a historic mining location, and the stream of interest is Burrows Creek. It basically drains the north and the west sides of Houghton Mountain. And so it starts up here and then just curves around the mountain, and then it dumps into the headwaters of the Animas River. Again, big area above tree line, mostly sedges, grasses, and willows along the stream. This is looking down. The main stream channel is down here in the bottom of the valley, and these are some of the wetland complexes that discharge water and feed Burrows Creek. And among these wetland complexes, we have fens, which are really rare wetland type. And in this particular location, these wetland complexes are fed by a combination of groundwater and surface water associated with Burrows Creek. We have in Burrows Creek, we have a macroinvertebrate community that's tolerant of heavy metals from the natural geologic sources and from acid mine drainage. We're working with CPW and the CWCB to set up some data collection and modeling during the 2024 calendar year. And so we will use that data to make some specific flow recommendations. This is a photo of one of the wetland complexes that's between Houghton Mountain and Burrows Creek. And these wetland complexes serve to grab on and retain heavy metals, so they assist in improving the water quality in Burrows Creek. Burrows Creek is a headwater stream way up at high altitude, so it's completely snowmelt driven hydrograph. It has low but reliable base flows, and gauge data is not available. But one of the things driving this recommendation is that BLM back in October of 2023 purchased the Mineral Point Ditch. It was the only significant water right on this creek, and it is shown here in this photo. And it diverted water from the headwaters of the Animas and shot it over this low divide that you see here, and delivered the water to the headwaters of the Uncompahgre River, and then the water was ultimately used near Ouray. BLM has purchased this water right and rerouted the water back to the creek for the purpose of improving water quality in Burrows Creek and re-wetting some of those stream side wetlands that have been desiccated by the operation of this water right. And so that's one of the things that's driving this recommendation is we want Burrows Creek to be protected along with this water that we are routing back into the creek. So the stakeholders include the Bonita Peak Citizen Advisory Group, some members of which you see here. We have mining claim owners of some of these mines in the area. We've initiated conversations with Southwestern Water Conservation District about the most strategic way to approach this in-stream flow appropriation and protecting the water that's going to be donated to the creek from the Mineral Point Ditch. And other stakeholders are San Juan County and, of course, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, who we're strategizing with. So those are the 5 BLM streams. And if you have any questions or want to talk further with me about them, my contact information is on this slide.
All right. Thank you very much, Roy.
And I'm going to stop sharing. There we go.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have Julie Lania with High Country Conservation Advocates.
All right, let me get this going.
All right.
So my name is Julie Nania, and I am the Water Program Director for High Country Conservation Advocates. And this year we've got a couple different proposals, 2 of them in partnership with Western Resource Advocates, and then a third in partnership with the National Park Service. We go about looking for in-stream flow protections in a bit of a different method than some of our other counterparts today. Essentially, we look for important environments in the Upper Gunnison Basin that would really benefit from those base flow protections. So we'll talk about some of the reasons that we selected these preliminary proposals that you'll hear about right now. So our first candidate creek this year is Canyon Creek. It is a creek in Water Division 4. It's a major tributary to Tomichi Creek, and currently it is unprotected. So this is a fairly significant watershed that it drains. It's got a brook and brown trout fishery and has been recently sampled by CPW. And something unique to this proposal is the Colorado Natural Heritage Program has identified it as a potential conservation area for its unique riparian area. So a really cool mix of different mesic communities and also wet meadow kind of interaction and shrublands as it kind of drops down at lower elevation. So we talked a little bit about the start of this proposal, about how we come to these numbers that we use for our preliminary recommendations. But essentially what we look for are the 3 criteria that R2 cross analysis looks for. And that involves looking at the velocity, wetted perimeter, and average depth of these streams. For our summer flow recommendations, we're hitting 3 out of 3 criteria. And typically for our base flow recommendations, we're looking for 2 out of 3 of those. So for Canyon Creek, we were able to get out there in June and also in September to do some sampling in last summer. And came up with a summer flow recommendation of 4.5 CFS and then a base flow recommendation of 1.5 CFS. And this is something that we look forward to refining and continuing to adjust with the CWCB staff. We also look at water availability when we're developing these proposals. This is one where we didn't have great gauge data available near the source, but we were able to look at the CSU flow modeling programs. And legal availability was pretty easy because there are no diversions on this segment. Once again, it's one of the key tributaries that heads into Tomichi, and there's nothing actually on the main stem of this creek. So another thing we like to do is talk about stakeholders that might be involved. The headwaters of the creek is soundly in Forest Service land. We always work with our local county commissioners to keep them in the loop about these potential appropriations. And then also our local conservancy district. So the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District is another good local stakeholder here. There is a small inholding in this that appears to be a former mining claim of sorts. And we were unable to find that landowner information, but that could be another potential partner, although they don't appear to have any interactions with the stream corridor. They could potentially be somebody interested in learning more about this. Our second proposal is a much different proposal. It's one of those really small tributary streams that tends to drain a fairly large basin in a more arid part of Water Division 4. There's also no existing in-stream flow right on Cabin Creek. And even though this is a small creek, it's pretty important for a number of different ecological reasons. And what you can see on this map is there's actually a Cabin Creek state wildlife area. And this is a really important source for different ungulates that are moving through the area, and also sustains a macroinvertebrate community. And there was evidence of historic beaver complexes, although they're no longer active on this reach. So with this one, similar to some of the recommendations from Roy, it's fairly small, so the flow recommendations reflect that. Our initial analysis would recommend a summer flow of about 1.1 CFS and about 1/3 of a CFS for that base flow time period. Similarly, there was no gauge data available for this creek. So once again, we looked at the modeling results. And one of the constraints in this recommendation will likely be a downstream ditch that does sweep the majority of the creek. So we're recommending that this flow extend from the headwaters to where that ditch ends up taking kind of the remainder of the flow. And this creek is 100% public lands, but managed by a couple different entities. So we've got the Bureau of Land Management involved, Forest Service, and also CPW. So they will be key stakeholders. And it's also important to note that CPW has a water right on this reach that they do use for wildlife purposes and irrigation. So that would be something that we'd want to work with them on and make sure that these uses are compatible. And other stakeholders are once again Gunnison County and the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District. So with that, I will jump over to a second presentation. I'll be co-presenting on our next proposal with Nikki Gibney from the National Park Service. So I'll go ahead and pull that up now. All right. Is that new presentation showing?
Yes.
Fantastic. So this is an exciting proposal because it's our first partnership with the Park Service and something we've been looking at for a couple of years. Red Creek is also in Water Division 4. It is a tributary to Blue Mesa that has its origins in the West Creek Wilderness area. And it does have an existing base flow rate of 1.5 CFS, but there's really no seasonal variability there. And I'm going to hand this presentation over to Nikki Gibney now, so she can talk a little bit about why the Park Service is interested in protecting that seasonal variability and some of the ecological importance of this stream. So Nikki, over to you.
All right. So yeah, I'm Nikki Gibney. I'm a biologist with the National Park Service. Red Creek, as you can see here, it's a tributary into Blue Mesa, and the bottom half-mile portion of the stream is also part of the Park Service property, or part of the Park Service Curricani National Recreation Area. So for the Park Service, we've been monitoring Red Creek for going back to 2001 in terms of water quality data. And then in 2013, we have data going back for aquatic macroinvertebrates. And we've always found healthy populations in Red Creek, and using the Colorado multimetric indices that are used by the state, it's always found to have no impairment. So a healthy population, and the stream also has an outstanding water designation that the National Park Service pursued and led to get that designation. And there are brown brook and rainbow trout all in the stream. And the entire watershed area is also has a healthy herd of Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep, and both resident and migratory elk and mule deer.
So we were able to get out and conduct a couple different sampling events, also in partnership with CPW. So thank you, Katie Birch. And once again, we're seeking to really hit that 3 out of 3 criteria to add to that hydrological variability in this in-stream flow protection. So the average of our cross sections recommended a 4 CFS summer flow rate and a 2 CFS winter base flow recommendation. And those proposed dates reflect a winter flow rate that starts in November 1st and runs through March 31st. And then an earlier summer runoff season, because it is at lower elevation, that goes through April 1st through October 31st. For water availability, we once again relied on CSU's flow modeling tool to look at the hydrograph. There's no gauge data readily available for this reach. And for legal availability, there were several historical ditch rights on this reach, in particular the historic Carpenter ditch. And we did work with our local water commissioners to discuss that. Those ditches are inoperable, and they did update CDSS to reflect that those are no longer diverting from this reach. So the stakeholders here are same mix of the usual suspects. We've got the Bureau of Land Management, Gunnison County, the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District, and Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And once again, this is one of those watersheds that is entirely public lands of one sort or another. And the entire extent of this runs about 6.7 miles from the headwaters to the confluence with Blue Mesa. And as Nikki noted, one of the other just kind of reasons we're really excited about this proposal is it will absolutely protect this local environment, but also will contribute to the water quality coming into Blue Mesa, which has been a big concern for our Upper Gunnison Basin in recent years with some of the water temperature and water level availability issues. So with that, I think we're going to hold questions to the end, but we did want to share some of our photos. When we were trying to take our cross-section photos, we were repeatedly photobombed by this hummingbird moth, and thought that that was pretty fun.
How beautiful. Thank you, Julie and Nikki.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now we will be transitioning to the acquisitions section of our workshop. And Pete Konovitz with the CWCB will start us off with an overview.
Thanks, Laura. Let me bring up my presentation. Can you see that all right?
Yes.
Great. So, hi, my name is Pete Konovitz with the CWCB Instream Flow Program. My primary responsibility within the program concerns acquisitions. So I'd like to give a brief overview of the acquisition program and give some examples of some of the types of transactions that the CWCB engages in. So in general, the CWCB can acquire water through donation, purchase, lease, or any other type of contractual arrangement. These acquisitions can be permanent or temporary, and they're always voluntary from willing water right owners. So that's a thing that we like to emphasize because the state acquiring water can sound kind of scary out of context. So it's always voluntary. And I'd like to say that the success of our program is due in no small part to our critical partnership with the Colorado Water Trust. And I know Blake Mamich from the Trust is going to speak next about their work and the request for water process. But I'd just like to say that I think since I've been at least with this program, that the majority of the acquisition projects that we've onboarded have come through the Water Trust, and that their technical and legal expertise is really critical to kind of getting these projects through our board process, as well as through the Division of Water Resources or Water Court approval process. Okay, here we go. So, acquisitions are pretty complementary to new appropriations. So where new appropriations typically involve minimum stream flows necessary to kind of preserve baseline conditions or base flows, water rights acquired through acquisitions can add water above that kind of minimum level to improve the natural environment. So you can have acquisitions that can be stacked upon existing in-stream flow water rights, or slowly acquired to add water that again improves the natural environment. And oftentimes, the limiting factor for new appropriations is a lack of physical or legal water availability. So, acquiring these kind of relatively senior rights can add water back to stream segments that need it the most, where you wouldn't be able to otherwise get a junior in-stream flow appropriation. There's a lot of flexibility in how these acquisitions can be structured. They can be specifically tailored to particular circumstances or requirements by the water right owner, because we know all situations are kind of unique and different. And as I mentioned before, it's voluntary. And then outside of donations, these acquisitions include compensation, typically at fair market value. So, in addition to helping the environment, these can act as an income source for water right owners. Also important is that when these water rights are used for in-stream flow, particularly on a temporary basis, the use of that water right is protected against abandonment. So you're not going to get a bunch of zeros in your use record, and your historic consumptive use amounts are not going to get dinged if it's not being used for its original decreed use. So that won't diminish the value of the water right over time. And again, with respect to flexibility, these aren't either or arrangements. These opportunities can be structured so that they're used part of the year and not permit for, say, irrigation in another part of the year. They could be implemented in only dry years. There's, again, lots of flexibility is kind of the key thing there. Okay, I'm just going to go through some of the types of acquisitions that we enter into. And first are these permanent acquisitions. So the CWCB can kind of attain water rights, the fee interest, the fee title of water rights through donation or purchase. And typically, these require taking that water right to court to add in-stream flow as an additional decreed beneficial use. So that would involve potentially a historic consumptive use analysis, and also, the eventual inclusion of terms and conditions so that there's no injury to other water right owners as a result of that change. So a good example of a permanent acquisition is the Peabody #1 ditch. So this is a water trust project that was brought to CWCB. This ditch is located on Boulder Creek, which is tributary to the Blue River between Dillon Reservoir and Green Mountain. So those water rights were acquired by the Water Trust and then donated to the Water Conservation Board for in-stream flow use. It was taken to court. In-stream flow use was added as a beneficial use, and now you have a significant flow benefit on a good reach of stream. So, we can protect essentially the full diversion amount from the original headgate location downstream to the point where the return flows historically accrued back to the stream. And then below there, we can protect the historic consumptive use amount. And because that HCU can be used and reused to extinction, that HCU can be stored in Green Mountain Reservoir and successfully reused for other uses downstream. Okay, another category are contractual interests in a particular water right. So these contracts or agreements, they can be structured to accommodate special circumstances, to address the needs of the owner or to address the needs of the Water Conservation Board. And similar to permanent acquisitions, they usually require going to water court to change the right to add in-stream flow as a use. A good example of this type of arrangement is the McKinley Ditch on the Little Cimarron River in the Gunnison Basin. So again, this is a water trust project originally where they acquired the water right, but then conveyed a contractual interest in the right to CWCB, a right to use that water. It was taken to court and changed. And with respect to the flexibility, the contract was written so that the water right can be used differently under different circumstances. So in some years, it could be used for the entire irrigation season, left in the stream for in-stream flow use. In other years, it can be used for just part of the season when it's critically needed. And then in some years, it doesn't need to be used for in-stream flow use at all. It can revert back to its original irrigation use. So temporary leases have become a real valuable tool to add flow to a particular stream reach. This can be particularly useful when someone wants to help improve flows in the stream, but they don't want to sell their water. And then so underneath these kind of leases, there's a few subcategories. So there are renewable leases where a water right can be temporarily changed to allow for an in-stream flow use. These types of leases can be implemented for up to 5 years within a 10-year approval period. And then that approval period could be renewed 2 additional times. So you could potentially use this lease for 15 years within a 30-year period. Another subcategory are expedited leases. So these are leases also temporary that allow for in-stream flow use for only 1 year. They're designed for kind of rapid implementation and approval to kind of address critical conditions that might come up, like for example, during a real bad drought. Both of these types of temporary leases don't require going to water court. They go through a Division of Water Resources approval process. It's kind of similar to a substitute water supply plan review, and that allows ample opportunity for public review and comment. These leases can also be structured really for any time period, but if it's operated outside of those sort of renewable expedited categories, then it's going to likely require going to water court for a change of use. So a good example of our leases is on Tamichi Creek. This was a renewable lease that was approved by our board last year, also brought forward by the Water Trust. Tamichi Creek is a tributary to the Gunnison River. And in this case, water that was historically diverted for irrigation is going to be left in the stream to be used, particularly during critically high temperature periods like July and August, when flows get very low and temperatures become a problem. With respect to the flexibility piece again, this is designed as a split season arrangement. So the ranch owners will be able to irrigate early in the season, like say during runoff and through June, and then in July when stream flows drop and things get very hot, they will put the water back in the stream and operate for in-stream flow. And then once the temperatures alleviate later in the season, they can resume irrigation. So this allows for continued agricultural production and is also pretty, I think, important for range health. And again, as always, the owners can decide, if and when they want to implement the lease in any given year. And finally, so a relatively new acquisition tool is what's known as an in-stream flow augmentation plan. So this is where water that's decreed for augmentation use can be protected within a designated stream reach. So if you think of traditional augmentation plans being used to replace, say, out of priority well depletions, in this case, you can think of a depletion in terms of a deficit in stream flow. So the augmentation water that's introduced to the stream can be protected from the point where it's introduced down to where it can be reused for its original intended augmentation use. So this type of plan, which the first of its kind, will be implemented on the Poudre River, and the cities of Fort Collins, Greeley, and Thornton will be dedicating some of their augmentation water rights to be used in the plan. And a decree is pending in the water court right now, so we hope to have that plan up and running within the next couple of years, I think. So that was my super brief overview of the acquisition program. You can always contact Rob, Kaylee, or myself for additional information. And I'd be happy to take questions unless we're holding them to the end. And otherwise, I'll just turn it over to Blake.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
All right. All right, audio good and slideshow showing up here.
Sounding and looking good, Blake. Thank you.
Good deal. All righty, good afternoon, folks. My name is Blake Mamick. I'm with the Colorado Water Trust, and my role here is a water resources specialist. Every year, the Water Trust goes through an outreach push called the request for water process, and we just like to let people know who we are and that we exist and what we do. So that's what I'm going to talk about here today. Hopefully I can advance my slide there. Cool. All right, so I'll break this down into 3 sections, and I'm going to pivot a little bit in part 3 because a couple of slides are going to be redundant with what Pete just went over. But for the most part, this will be broken down into a little bit about the Water Trust and who we are. I'll describe our request for water process and that outreach effort. And then I'll talk a bit about our kind of 3-step process for looking at a water right and determining which legal tool to use that for stream flow restoration. So, part 1. You might be familiar with the Water Trust, but if you're not, I'll tell you a bit about us. We're a Colorado nonprofit, and we work statewide to restore flow to Colorado's rivers at times and in places where they are in need. We got our start in 2001 when a group of water lawyers and engineers got together and decided to work together to help amplify the state's in-stream flow program. Today, we still work very closely with the Instream flow program, but we also use a variety of mechanisms that aren't necessarily involving the Instream flow program. The transactions that the Water Trust works on are as individual as the water rights and the basins that they come from. And this is why we employ attorneys and technical staff so we can do that work. Finally, we work entirely within the prior appropriation system and compensate water rights holders at fair market value for water restored to the stream. All right, so as of last year, the Water Trust has successfully completed 25 projects around the state. You can see there in the map the locations of those projects, and altogether they've added up to about 74,000 acre-feet of water, over 600 miles of stream in Colorado. All right, part 2. Because the Water Trust works on a voluntary basis, just like Pete described with their acquisition program. We don't target water rights or water rights owners or particular streams. And so it's important for us to do outreach so that people know that we're here and that they can choose to work with us if they want to. So the request for water process is a big part of that structured outreach. And it's an effort where we invite water rights owners who are interested in finding out whether their water can benefit the natural stream to basically submit kind of a preliminary offer to the water trust. It's important that to note that this offer doesn't commit a water rights owner in any way, shape, or form to do a project with us or anyone else. It's more of an invitation for the water trust to evaluate that water rights owner's water rights and see what their potential environmental benefit will be with that water. This evaluation is always done at no cost, and it's as confidential as the water rights owner wants it to be. So in general, the water rights that we prefer to evaluate have a decreed diversion rate of over a half CFS or a storage right of over 20 acre-feet. The water right also has to have a good history and record of use, and the water rights owner has to be willing to accept some sort of change to their operation. Water rights that we cannot accept are conditional water rights, groundwater rights, springs, or water rights that are on the abandonment list. So one thing that we've changed about the request for water process last year, and we're going to continue into this year, is we used to have a pretty specific timeline for accepting these offers and then reviewing them. And we've just kind of found that having a tight timeline isn't totally necessary. And if someone wants to send us an offer of a water right, we're happy to take a look at that at any time of year. So generally, we start this outreach process in the beginning of the year. And then from that point on, we're ready to listen to folks if they've got a water right that they want us to take a look at. And then kind of depending on workload and time of year, that'll depend on how quickly we can turn around that analysis. So if this is of interest to anyone on this call, or they know people who might be interested, please check out our website or shoot us an email, give me a call. I'm happy to pick up the phone, and I'll provide my contact information at the end of this presentation. So I'll dive into part 3 here, and this is going to be our 3-step process in evaluating a water right and choosing a legal tool or mechanism to restore water to the stream. All right, so the first thing that we do is we take a look at the stream, and here you've got a couple hydrographs, one in a dry year, one in a wet year, and we'll evaluate that stream's hydrology to determine if there's a need for more flow in a certain time or at a certain place. So in this particular instance, in a dry year, you've got a pretty significant deficit between a target flow rate here of about 20 CFS. And even in a wet year, you have a shorter time span, but you still have that deficit. And then the stream kind of recovers in this late July, August time of year. You know, you might see some monsoonal moisture help in there, people turning off to hay, that kind of thing. So in this case, we have location, which is the stream here, reflecting these deficits, and we have a time in which there's a need for additional flow to meet this flow threshold. So once we've determined if there's a time and a need for more water, then we start to look at the water right. And we can see that there's a couple water rights and diversions associated with this dry stream reach and that deficit time. So you've got a low head dam here that's a diversion point, and then you've got a pumping station here. And what we can see is that if you look at the diversion records from these two diversions, they correlate. They are in fact diverting when we have this dip below the threshold here in the stream. So we can take a look at those rights and say, hey, if we were able to change some operations here, we might be able to get above this threshold for some sort of non-diversion agreement. And once we have kind of everything lined out as far as the hydrology and the water right, we've dug into the water right, its decree, its record of use, we've compared it to the time and place in the stream is in need, and we've determined that changing the operation can restore flow to the stream. Then that's when we start to look at the tools that we might use to restore that flow. There's a whole menu of legal tools available, and Pete talked about the same ones that I'm going to talk about here, or rather I'll probably skip past a little bit just so it's not too redundant. But largely they fall into three major categories: permanent, flexible, and temporary. And I think Pete hit on permanent change of use to in-stream flow. He hit on the temporary loan to in-stream flow. So I'll talk briefly about strategic reservoir releases and wrap it up from there. So reservoir releases are basically exactly what they sound like: water stored in an upstream reservoir and then released to boost flow downstream. And what makes these an effective tool is the strategic part, and means closely monitoring the stream in terms of location and timing of releasing water at a rate and time that do the most good. So here we just kind of have a little diagram, your reservoir, and being able to release some additional water, enhance stream flow here. And this is something that the Water Trust has become particularly familiar with in the Yampa Basin and releasing water at a Stagecoach reservoir. I think we've done that every year since 2015. And one of the tools that we've used or rather is in place now, and we will likely use this year, is the 5 and 10 temporary loan to in-stream flow that Pete talked about. So potentially this will be the first year we operate that. We have that in place, an agreement with Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District, the Colorado Water Trust, and the CWCB to operate in-stream flow loan. And basically the goal there will be to address deficits in the river and kind of fill in the hole in the hydrograph here at a time when the river needs it most. And got a bit of a diagram here showing that. So one final note here, Pete hit on this as well, and I'll conclude here with a few notes on compensation, and that's that when it's requested, we use contracted market-based evaluations of water rights to determine compensation amount. And these can vary pretty widely from basin to basin. And then there's some additional benefits into working with us and using water rights for in-stream flow use, adding flow to the stream, and that in the tools that we use, we can protect against abandonment and safeguard HCU while helping the local stream. So with that, I'll conclude. give you a quick recap. The Water Trust is a nonprofit organization that specializes in water transactions that benefit the environment. Each year we do outreach and kind of blast out our request for water program and invite water rights owners to fill out a form and send it to us, and we'll conduct a free confidential review. And then I explained our three-step process for evaluating a water right and evaluating the legal tool that we use to get that water in the stream. Here's my contact information, as well as that of our executive director, Kate Ryan, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Blake. I am now going to open up our meeting for any questions that anyone has for any of our presenters. If you would like to ask a question, please feel free to raise your hands or turn on your camera and unmute yourself, or hop into the chat and ask it there, and I will read it out loud. No need to be shy if you have any questions. Ooh, Dawn, yes.
Hi, I'm just a question for Julie regarding Canyon Creek.
Yes.
Hey, I understand that Trout Unlimited is working on some trout ladders. And are you in contact with them?
I have not discussed that project with them. Would that be below, right by that confluence with Tamichi Creek, perchance?
Oh, I'm not sure. I think they're working on them at the end of JV Court. There is a dam, and they're working on a trout ladder there, and then also down at the confluence right at the where it meets the Colorado River. I think they're also working down there.
That might be on the right where it joins with Tamichi Creek, but that's a good point, and I will reach out with them to see if they're doing anything upstream of that. But I think that diversion structure is actually on Tamichi, but it is close to that confluence there.
Okay, yeah, because I know I've seen. I mean, there are just tons of the trout, both the brown and the brook. Just jumping. So it would be fantastic to have that. But anyway, I know those projects are underway, and that there's, millions of dollars that have been allocated for that. So anyway, it sounds like that would be a great partner to have, or at least you should be aware of it.
Yeah, worth reaching out to Jesse Kruthup to check in on that. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hey, Laura, this is
Roy.
Roy Smith. Can a panelist ask a panelist a question? Is that inside the rules?
More than welcome.
Okay. This is for Blake. He had a slide that showed the tools that the trust uses. And among those, there was one that I'm not familiar with called I think it was called agricultural water right conversion or something like that. And I was wondering if Blake could give a brief nutshell of that tool.
Yeah, Roy, that's probably the tool I'm least familiar with, so appreciate that. No, it's only available in, I believe, Division 1 and maybe 2. So I'll have to check in on that for sure. But basically, what it allows an agricultural user to do is quantify their historic consumptive use, and then be able to use that historic consumptive use in a way similar to a change, but basically kind of like preemptively have that process gone through so that they can use that water for another use, one of which being in-stream flow.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Blake, I would be interested in learning more about that tool, especially if it applies outside of water divisions 1 and 2. I'm thinking about, does it apply on the west slope?
Yeah, not presently as far as I
Okay.
know. But yeah, I'll catch up with you, Roy, because I could use some refresher on ag water.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you.
As well.
Okay.
Thank you both. All right, I believe Dallas May has a question.
Yes, thank you. One question I had is, could somebody explain the reasoning behind groundwater not being accepted as an in-stream flow possibility? And why I ask that is, especially here on the lower Arkansas basin, we have a lot of wells that are tributary to not only the river, but tributary to ground streams, maybe are pulling water out of the alluvial and are considered by the state to be directly tributary to those streams and rivers. And I just wondered if there was any means that some of those wells could possibly be retired. The owners of the right could be compensated for that, and that water could be considered an in-stream flow once it was returned to those streams.
Pete or Blake, would you like to chime in on that one?
I can take a stab at some of the issues. I'm not really sure. I mean, it's a good question. I think part of one issue might be kind of quantification of the benefit if you retire that well. Typically when the Division of Water Resources or you go through water court to change a water right or temporarily use that water right for in-stream flow use, they want to have kind of a very sort of thorough accounting of the quantification. And so with the wells, it might be a little bit more difficult because it's a groundwater issue. You're attenuating that benefit to the stream. You also have kind of a lag depletion issue that, if those aren't replaced, those still need to be addressed. So I think that might be part of it. And part of it might be it just hasn't been done before. And there may be ways that it could be done in the future. It just hasn't been, addressed yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing I was thinking about is Division of Water Resources uses a stream flow depletion factor, and they use that to quantify the amount that a well is depleting the river. I think they also use that formula in reverse whenever there is a recharge pond. So I thought maybe there might be a means that could be incorporated to quantify the use of a well. It was a question I had, and that helps. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dallas. That is a very interesting question and thought for future. All right. Next up, Kaylee Hendrickson, I believe you have a question.
Good evening. Thank you. Yes. Probably a 2 or 3 part question.
Mhm.
So just if I making sure that I understand things, I've made some phone calls today to get clarification. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding them right. So on regards to the stacking, if there is a current in-stream flow of approximately, let's say 100 CFS, I know that's very large compared to what we're talking about, but there happens to be one twice that size here on the White River.
Mhm.
But if we have 100 CFS, somebody donates a 10 CFS to Instream in this that could come into the same area, then that could make it 110 CFS in-stream flow in that stretch. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
With acquisitions, we can add on to the minimum flow.
Okay. So then the second part is, let's say, knowing that 70s in-stream flow is that 100 CFS.
Mm-hmm.
If there is a 1915 water right that is donated,
Mm-hmm.
then does all or a part of that 110 CFS become 1915 water right?
I believe that it is only the portion that is donated that had that 1915, you said?
Yeah, let's say that.
Okay.
I'm pulling numbers out
Thank
of the
you.
air here, sorry.
Okay, no worries. It would only be that portion of the water right that would have that adjudication date. Everything else would remain with its priority of a junior water right. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
I think so. So if I have a 1950 water right,
Mm-hmm. 1950s.
it would have to get down to whatever I said, let's say that 5 or 10 CFS in the river before that could call my water right out.
That
Is that
gets a little
correct?
bit trickier. I'm gonna tap my boss, Rob.
Hi,
So
Rob.
Callie, I think that is correct, that you would have to have the senior water right be met, and then the 1950 water right would then be the next one in line ahead of the in-stream flow junior right. So it wouldn't have to be the entire junior in-stream flow water right, just that senior change water right would have to be met first.
Okay. Those are important pieces to our agriculture
Did I clear that up, or did I make it more
producers.
confusing?
Yeah. Okay. I think that helps me understand it. If I'm right there, I appreciate that clarification.
Kelly?
Question, maybe for Pete.
Hi, Mandy.
Hi, I was just wondering, what sorts of challenges and hurdles do you guys find when you're trying to get in-stream water flow rights through the court process? Is it protests, or what other types of things, the challenges that you guys face in getting those passed?
Yeah, that's a good question. Oh,
Yes,
sorry.
go
Laura.
for it.
Go
No, you're
ahead.
good.
Oh, I thought it was directed to me. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of challenges are probably similar to changing any water right. You have to deal with basically issues that may result in injury to other users. With in-stream flow water rights, I think a big issue is administration. How do you administer that water? Because traditional sort of consumptive water rights, they're easy to measure, right? They just get taken out of the stream and you can measure it, you know exactly what's going on. With in-stream flow water rights, it's kind of hard to tell without extensive gauging, like what's happening in a particular reach of stream. So if you're going to try and administer a water right, if you don't have gauging in the right locations, it can be real hard to administer. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's some of the things that came to mind for me.
Yeah, that does, and that kind of brings up another question. So then when you guys do have your in-stream flow rights already then adjudicated, do you have somebody that kind of watches to see when a stream, like when you could possibly put a call in to keep your in-stream flow right, bring that into priority? Do you have people watching for that? Or do you kind of just, it depends on maybe, like you say, you only kind of watch maybe where the gauging stations are, because that's where you'd be able to actually do administration.
Yeah, our team kind of splits up all of the divisions and monitors. We have kind of a stream gauge alert network, so all of the gauges that can be used to administer water rights are sort of networked, and we get alerts when things drop below a certain threshold amount. But you're right. I mean, there are situations where we have rights that are on reaches that are ungauged, so we kind of have trouble administering them. But where we do have gauging, we are able to administer. Sure, when we see that it flows dropping below the decreed rate, then we can, in some cases, place a call if there is meaningful water to curtail upstream.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Anyone else have any questions? I just got one on the chat. It is, what is the process used to add stream gauges? And is there an effort being made to increase stream gauges on ISF stretches? We do not have a specific process, but we do work with the Department of Water Resources and the USGS on areas that are very important for managing our ISF reaches, and it is currently a ongoing conversation that we are working on. As for stream gauges for our new appropriations, we do some temporary installations to get an idea of what is going on in situations that are particularly complex or very lacking in data. Does that answer your question, Marcia, or do you have any more that you would like to ask? Thank you. All right, Julie asked if there are no current in-stream flows for boating and recreation. Yes, that is correct. That is a different type of water rate that the CWCB does not control or is not in charge of. Thank you, Julie. Anyone else have any questions? Well, if any questions come up, you can contact any of the presenters or Rob Veal or anyone here in the in-stream flow section. And I think we're going to sign off for now. Thank you very much. And we'll see you back here at the next in-stream flow annual meeting if you so desire. Thank you to all of our presenters and everyone who joined. Good night.
Thank you.